What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Breaking the Game show here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. Today we are guestless, Austin. I'm going to go ahead and introduce us real quick, though. I already said your name. You are Austin Carr. I am Stephen Gillespie. Together we are the co-hosts of the Breaking the Game show. What's up, Austin?
Hey, not much. How's it going, Steven?
Man, life is good. Just got a lot of plates spinning in the air right now. I know, as do you. And it always feels better when you and I get to connect throughout the week and talk NBA basketball. It feels like life just kind of slows down and things are right in the world.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I'm excited to do the show today. It's always fun to have a guest, but I always look forward to these more intimate times when it's just you and me. So.
Awesome. Excellent stuff. Well, today we got a couple of different topics that we're going to discuss here on the show. And Austin, I would like to get your thoughts on the Brooklyn Big Three debut that happened the other night when they lost to the Cleveland Cavaliers. Kind of what were your expectations coming into the game? How did you evaluate the game and the stats? And, now that we've had a little bit of time to digest the game, how did that sit with you?
Well, I mean, it's in terms of the performance of all three of those guys. I don't think you could want much more out of those three. Durant had 38. Kyrie came back and had 37 points, and of course, James Harden had another triple double. So I think in terms of individual production from those three guys, you have to be happy. Obviously, I don't think anybody. Sorry, a chair just fell over. I don't think anybody expected a loss to Cleveland, especially without Darius Garland. I mean, they've been out without him for a little while this season. But the one issue that I really did see is, are they going to be able to guard anybody? Because I think in terms of points per 100 possessions, they gave up 125 last night to the worst offense in the league. The Cleveland Cavaliers only average 103 points per 100 possessions. And it was kind of a one-man show down the stretch. I think it was something I saw that was interesting, and I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on this, if this is just, coincidence or something more. But, Kyrie comes back. It's the night of his kind of tribute. They did a tribute night to him. And Colin Sexton wears the same exact number that he used to wear there in Cleveland. And
well, not just for that night, since he's been drafted, right? So
right, yeah, obviously.
I'm just want to point that out.
But yeah, so it was interesting to see. Colin Sexton, I think, had 47 or 42.
It was insane. He
scored 20 points in a row for Cleveland at one time, including 15 in the second overtime. And I actually had to look it up because I wasn't sure. I thought maybe that might be the most points in a single overtime. But Steph Curry had 17 in a playoff game in an overtime, and Gilbert Arenas had 16 in an overtime once. But other than that,
the chef and hibachi, how fitting, right?
Right, exactly. So obviously he was in rare company there, and I think you saw it a little bit at the end of the game when Kyrie was kind of just smiling and laughing almost after he made a couple of those shots, just like, what more can we do to this guy? And
right.
So it was interesting. It's just one game. Obviously, we've seen this from Big Threes in the past. The Miami Heat Big Three took some time to get going. They all do. They're going to have to figure out a way to make the offense a little less, okay, here it's your turn. Here it's my turn. Here it's your turn. And kind of try to get into a flow of an offense a little bit more, I think. But it's just one game. I wouldn't be too worried beyond the defense. The defense is they're going to have to figure out something.
Well, Ken, I want to speak to that point just a little bit, and I think in the final overtime, I will concede that the Nets defense gave way. But throughout the night, they were actually pretty competitive. At one point, the Nets were down by double figures because they couldn't hit a shot, and their defense actually got them back into the lead going into the fourth quarter. So I think that there were several moments in the game where, especially the guys, their big three, Durant's really never considered like a hands down elite defender. In Golden State, he kind of developed into being a competent to probably a little bit above average defender, but he was incredible that night. I saw Kyrie Irving hustle a lot on the defensive end that night, and James Harden too. There were stretches where James Harden was guarding Andre Drummond, and that's that post defense that everybody says, James Harden is not that bad of a defender. He's really good in the post. He actually showed it a little bit that night. I wouldn't expect them to have a top 10 defense the first time playing together. And yes, there's the argument where, they played USA basketball together, or, Durant and Harden played together in Oklahoma City. That was, over 10 years ago, right? So there's a long time in between these guys actually playing competitive basketball against NBA competition in an NBA setting. Actually, it's never happened until that night. So I thought for game one, you don't go into this game hoping, well, obviously you hope for a win, but that's not what you go into that night looking for. You're looking for lineups and rotations. You're looking to see how guys play off of one another, how they communicate on the defensive end, because basically what that night would be to me, if I was Steve Nash, I would go into this night saying, okay, guys, we're going to try to execute everything as best we can, and we're going to learn from this experience, win or loss. Even if they win, you want to come out of that victory saying, how can we improve things? Their defense and their activity off the ball. I saw Kyrie Irving getting a lot of slander, and it's like the hip thing to bust Kyrie Irving's butt, and talk about all the things that he does not do, right? And I watched that night. He set screens. He moved off the ball. He rebounded on the offense and defensive glass, and he passed the ball. He didn't get a lot of assists per se, but he did move the ball around. So I felt that all of that was impressive. And Austin, you were just talking about how Cleveland, they lost to the lowly Cavaliers. Right now, the Cavs are in sixth place. Do you think that means anything right now?
I think it does. I mean, it's not like the Cavaliers are the worst team in the NBA. It's not like they just went out and got blown out by the Detroit Pistons. Cleveland's obviously got a star in the making in Colin Sexton. So sometimes guys just get hot like that. And I mean, It's been a long time since I've seen anything quite like that. And so, you kind of made a good point. It's one game, you're looking more for how it looks than the results, so to speak. And like Steve Nash said, they've had one walkthrough as a whole full team, and they're going to miss Spencer Dinwiddie. I think having him out for the year, really kind of hamstrings them in terms of depth. They went from being a team that I would say was the deepest team in the NBA to now, obviously, they're a little bit more top heavy, but Joe Harris will have better nights. Landry Shamet didn't even play.
Right.
They've still got the rookie Reggie Perry, who obviously I think they like a little bit. And they got, I think, 4 threes out of Jeff Green. So he looked good in his role.
He actually started for that team. So their starting lineup was Irving, Harden, Durant, Green, and DeAndre Jordan. And I think that was kind of interesting coming in. And these rotations are going to be very fluid moving forward, Austin. And I think that we'll see a lot of Joe Harris, whether he starts or not. He's going to be an integral piece into whatever they do moving down the line.
Oh, definitely. And, like you said, I don't know that this is their starting lineup going forward for good or not. And I don't think they know either. It seemed to be pretty successful when they kind of staggered 2 of the 3 guys in of the big 3 at once. And that's kind of what worked best for the Miami Heat as well. They seemed a lot more comfortable when they were, back when they had LeBron and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. It worked better when all 3 of them weren't necessarily always on the court together. So that may be something you see too going forward. But anybody that's going on social media or going out in the media and blasting the nets after one game just doesn't understand how this thing works, I don't think. Or they're just haters or trying to make a headline or whatever. Because you can't, no matter how much talent you put on a court, you can't just expect everything to work after one game.
Yeah, and they gave up 147 points, sure, but I think that we forget that was in double overtime.
Right.
If you look at the score at the end of regulation, they held the Cavaliers to roughly like 100 points or so, I want to say. So, I mean, it's not like they got blown that they got blown out throughout the duration of this game. It was a really good game. Colin Sexton just got hot at the exact precise right moment in the game and hit some ridiculous shots. I watched a lot of these shots. He was contested. It's not like they were giving him open looks. He just made almost impossible shots.
Yeah, I think that was kind of my point when I said you saw Kyrie at the end of the game just almost throw up his hands and laugh. Like,
right. And
some people kind of try to take that the wrong way too. Like he didn't care. And I think at some point it's just like, what am I supposed to do with this guy? He's making everything and I'm all over him. I'm doing the best I can, and to score, what was it, 20 consecutive points for Cleveland in the 2 overtimes and 15 in the second overtime. So he only had 22 in regulation. So it's not like he was
only,
Well, it's not like he was, just running them out of the gym the entire game. Like you said, he got hot right at the right moment, and they
Just
couldn't slow
couldn't
him down
miss.
enough. Right.
I think
Sometimes
he
guys just
tried
get
to
hot.
miss. I think he tried to miss at one point just to see if he could, and he just forgot how to
Right.
miss. It was
Right.
insane. But I just want to touch on a couple little stats of what I like to call,
Mhm.
winning stats based on
Of
this
course.
game. The Nets were -2 in turnovers, right? So that means they turned the ball over more. They were -3 in fouls, meaning they fouled more. They were +2 in rebounds. So this Nets team that everyone was super concerned about, how are they going to rebound? How are they going to play defense? They out rebounded the Cavaliers, who have some pretty good rebounders on that team, mind you. They
Mhm.
were +6 in free throw attempts. So obviously with KD, with James Harden, and Kyrie Irving, they're going to get to the free throw line. Although they did foul more throughout the game, they did get more free throw attempts. They allowed 0.09 points per possession, which is why they lost the way that they did. They allowed 51% from the field, and 20 of 40 three-point attempts went in for the Cavaliers. I don't know how many nights the Cavs are going to put up 20 out of 40, but they sure did that night.
Right. Yeah, that's something that I don't think you can expect going forward from this Cavaliers team every night like that. And I don't think Brooklyn should be too worried after this performance. Talent kind of trumps everything in the NBA when it's all said and done. And they've obviously got more talent than just about any team in the NBA, I would say, at this point. So, they'll be all right. They'll be just fine. Cleveland's had a good year. Cleveland surprised some people. This NBA season has been really, really odd, especially in terms of picking winners of these games and betting favorites and things like that. I've been reading tons of articles about how much money, like sports books in Las Vegas are losing because these money lines and the over-unders and all that stuff are so far off lately. It's been crazy. And I think people get kind of distracted by the giant blowouts that they see, and they miss the fact that, there is still a lot of good basketball going on, and there are still a lot of close games. And this game went to 2 overtimes. Yeah, they got beat fairly handily on the final score.
8 points. It wasn't.
Yeah, but so it was close. It was back and forth. They got down, they came back. So even though there may not have been, according to some people, any defense played, it was still a tight game throughout. So it's still good basketball, and I just think you can expect kind of good things going forward from both of these teams. I'd like to see Cleveland get back to full strength and see what they can do, and how far they can push this thing. And obviously, Brooklyn's kind of seems like they're championship or bust now. So they're in a little bit different spots in terms of expectations for the season, but I think both these teams are have to be happy with what they have going forward.
Yeah, and you talked about the high scores and stuff like that. If we consider that this was 6 periods of basketball, they only averaged giving up 25 points a quarter. That's like a far cry from
that's actually pretty good defense today,
right? Correct. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like a far cry from the lack of defense that we keep hearing about. But anyway, I digress. And we will progress into the next segment of our show. Austin, we got the big news out of the way about the big 3. Everybody was focused on that. Thank you for League Pass covering that game. That was not televised. So we will move into now, Austin, a segment that I'm really looking forward to just being able to kind of go back and forth with you. Maybe I'll learn something. I seem to always do whenever we have these discussions.
Well, good.
We hear all the time about, who should be the MVP. Mike Malone has come out for the Denver Nuggets and has been beating his chest for Nikola Jokic. And there's a little bit of back and forth as to whether or not he deserves it for several reasons. Joel, Embiid is getting a lot of attention from you and others in the media as to being deserving. We can't forget LeBron James because he is one of the best to ever do it. There's several other players that have, a claim to stake for the MVP this season, Austin. And instead of talking about who deserves it and giving down the list of reasons and arguing until we're blue or red in the face, I want to go into what's your criteria, because obviously it's still early. We haven't even played 20 games in the season yet, but I think it would be fruitful to talk about what goes into your MVP consideration when you're looking at, who's deserving of being an MVP. What are some of the criteria that you have? I think I may have lost my co-host here. All right, so instead of Austin giving his breakdown of who should be the MVP and why, I'll go ahead and talk about the reasons that the considerations that I give for MVP. So one thing, the biggest thing that I look at is the individual performance. How do you look throughout the course of the game? The eye test is the biggest part. I'm a big analytics guy. My co-host Austin Carr is as well. We love talking numbers, stats, traditional, advanced alike. We love all of those things. However, how you look throughout the course of an actual game, are you able to dominate? Are there periods of the game where you can't miss, a la Colin Sexton? So there's a bunch of different things throughout the course of a game that I look at, and it all starts with literally how you play the game of basketball and how you look on the floor. Then I go into my statistical backing, and I mentioned, you got your traditional counting stats, points per game, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals, all of those things. They should correlate to what we're seeing on the floor. There are guys who do have high numbers in each of these categories that it doesn't really match what you're seeing on the floor. Andre Drummond has had seasons where you could say, what about Andre Drummond for MVP? Or CJ McCollum? There's players that can put up big numbers and still leave a lot to desire on the floor when you actually watch them play. So as long as their numbers in the traditional sense back what we're seeing, I love those. Advanced stats where you got like player impact efficiency, player effectiveness rating, so PIR or PIE and PER. Those things I'll take into account as well. Then we have the efficiency part. Not only are you putting up big numbers, but how does that look throughout the game? And then how does that actually tally out in the statistical categories that I just mentioned? How efficient are you at getting 30 points per game if you're getting that? What does 20 rebounds per game look like throughout the course of a game? There's a lot of things that you have to consider as far as efficiency. You got to look good doing it when you do it. And we have my buddy Austin Carr back. So Austin,
sorry about that.
It's all right. It's all right. So basically, I just wanted to recap what I just went over with our guests here. I went over some of the things that I look for whenever I consider MVP is your individual performance. That's the biggest part, because MVP is an individual award. There are some other factors that I'll talk about here in a second, but overall, the individual performance, what do you look like on the floor? That's the biggest part, the eye test. Can you dominate the game? Can you have, times where even if you're getting double, triple team, still be effective with the ball? And then do you have traditional and advanced statistics that can kind of back those things up? And then how efficient are you on the floor? What say you?
I agree. Actually, right before I cut out there, I was saying I think the most important thing that people have to remember is that it's an individual award. And I think that gets away from people sometimes because, and I'll be one to admit that, it's hard to vote for a guy for MVP on a 5th or 6th or 7th place team or a team that's struggling to make the playoffs. But sometimes, context is a big issue with that because it could be a young team that doesn't have any kind of expectations at all and say, their one star player has a breakout year and leads them to the 4th or 5th seed. Is that more impressive than a Giannis or a LeBron whose team is expected to be in 1st place or 2nd place all year, kind of doing what he was expected? Sometimes I think it is. I think context definitely plays a big role in terms of those numbers. And, what you said about Coach Mike Malone and, beating his chest for Nikola Jokic. I mean, he has put up pretty historic numbers for the first 15 games of this season. But his team's expected to win, and they've been struggling. And so I think that does play a part in it too, because regardless of how good he's been, he's not doing the things apparently that they need to do to win those close games. It's at least up to this point. They've righted the ship some recently, but I just think context with like expectations plus your individual, performance to me is kind of the biggest factor.
Yeah, and I just got done talking about, too, that you can't just look at numbers because there's, like right now, Bradley Beal leads the league in scoring, right? And he's been phenomenal. And even if his team were like maybe the 6th seed, I don't know that I would put him over other guys, right? Because also you got to take into consideration how you efficient you are on the floor at doing whatever these numbers are. Does 10 assists look like it works throughout the course of a game? Like you were just saying with Jokic, are those 10 effective assists per game? Or are you looking only to make a pass that leads directly to a bucket? Are you willing to give the pass that leads to a pass, to move the ball around and what have you? So there's that aspect to it as well. I also like two-way ability if you can affect the game on both sides of the ball. I like that too. How you diversify your shot portfolio. I don't like it whenever a player can only do one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Even if he's like really good at it, I like you being able to affect the game in a number of ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you make the players of those around you better? And then that effectively goes into the last part of team success. It's not as important to me, but it does weigh in. If you've missed games, how does your team look without you? That's kind of a weird one to say out loud, but it's one that I internally think about, because you don't root for guys to miss games, but if you do, you want to see how impactful their presence really is to their team.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I think that the weight of your individual success, how it affects your team success in crucial moments of the game. So like clutch situations and things like that, with Giannis, kind of missing free throws and it's actually costing his team games. Like free throws aren't the most important thing in the world to me, but I mean, if you have a key vulnerability that can get taken advantage of in key moments of the game,
Mm-hmm.
that's a little bit of a chink in your armor in my eyes.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad you brought up Giannis because we've seen it this season more than ever before. It seems like down the stretch in games that Milwaukee's going away from him more and more. And I think it is partially because they can foul him and he's not a knockdown, guaranteed 2 points at the free throw line. And it is partially because he lacks that mid to 3-point range, in terms of jump shooting. He can kind of only do one thing, and teams have kind of started to figure out how to slow that down and how to draw offensive fouls from him. So I do see that there's a hole there for him in terms of his game. And the MVP award is one thing where I think you're more than welcome to be extremely stingy on. It's the MVP. You should be. You should have extremely high standards. There shouldn't really be a guaranteed way to take this guy out of the game if you expect him to be the MVP. And I think a lot of times a guy like Shaquille O'Neal only ended up with only one MVP versus a guy like Steve Nash who had two, partially because down the stretch of games, you could take him out of a game in a lot of ways. And you could foul him. And he was a poor free throw shooter. And a lot of times he was in foul trouble in those ends of those games. So, a guy like Giannis, like you said, is so dominant at one or two things that it kind of overshadows everything else on the court until, like this is the third year in a row now where he's been considered one of the 2 or 3 best players in the league. And you start to realize, well, if he's that good, why do we keep seeing these shortcomings? Why do we keep seeing his team kind of falter towards the end of the season and the playoffs? And I like what you said about take the guy off the floor and what does his team look like?
Mm-hmm.
If Luka Doncic, hopefully it doesn't happen, but if he misses 10 games this year and Dallas goes 8-2, then maybe, which I don't think would happen, but if they did,
correct.
It's something that says, okay, well, maybe despite these huge numbers that he's not quite as valuable to this team as we originally thought. Or if vice versa, if LeBron misses 10 games and Anthony Davis is leading the Lakers and they go 2-8, that looks kind of good on LeBron and kind of, puts a pretty big chink in the armor of Anthony Davis to take your term. And I just think there's a lot of things that go into it. Like I said, context of how they're getting those numbers, how good would his team be without him, and what was the expectation going into the season. And I think that's the one thing that's hurting Jokic is that everybody expected Denver to be near the top of the standings. And despite his amazing start, they're not there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also do think sometimes there's just statistical outlier seasons that you just have to reward. Like a few years ago when Russell Westbrook averaged a triple-double, a 30-point triple-double. And, he wasn't exactly efficient and they weren't, setting the world on fire in first or second place. But that was just something that people hadn't seen in 40 or 50 years and might not ever see again. And, so there's a lot of things that go into it. But I think for me, are you affecting your team in the big moments, helping them win games? Are you at the top of the leaderboards in multiple statistical categories? And what are you at least living up to, if not exceeding expectations for the season?
Those are all fair points, and I think that you and I we agree in that aspect. And since we've talked about what we consider for MVP categories. I think that it would also be pretty fun and, prudent to talk about things that we hear being brought up in, big media, other fan bases, things of that nature, that we feel do not belong in MVP categories. And I think that this is just as if maybe not more important, especially with the way that some particular fans, look at things like this, and they point to X, Y, and Z and say, well, this is the reason why this player should be MVP. And so, Austin, I would like to give you just a couple and get your thoughts on these. Number one, age. I don't think that age should be considered when you look at an MVP award. And this is in reference to last season where you got to pick between Giannis Antetokounmpo and LeBron James, essentially. And people saying, look at everything that LeBron James is doing at this age. We've never seen anything like this before. Now, I'm all for uniqueness, but I would like that uniqueness to be able to be obtained by basically everybody else. Like, anybody else they do theoretically have the chance to go out and try to obtain a triple double. They can't go out every night and try to be 37 years old. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way they can go out there and just be 10, 15 years older than what they actually are. So I don't think that should hurt a player, because, and you may not even intentionally think that that's what you're doing when you consider like, oh, well, look at what this guy is doing at this age. You may be looking at that as a way to further like accentuate how dominant they are, but you're also discrediting somebody else who's probably being just as dominant in their respective positions and the areas of the game that they have a higher impact on, because you're giving someone credit for something that the other one has no chance of going out on the floor and actually physically being able to replicate. Austin, what do you think about age?
This is one that always kind of makes me laugh. It's to me, it should be completely irrelevant. Just for the simple fact that what you said, Giannis Antetokounmpo can't be 36 years old. Not yet. He will be.
Give it time.
Steph Curry can't help that he's 32 or 31 or however old he is. And anytime you create a narrative that really kind of just pigeonholes one player or one person into that narrative, I don't think it makes sense. We're not talking about a year to year to year award. We're talking about an individual yearly award.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter that LeBron James is 36 years old doing things no other 36-year-old has done, unless we're going to create a MVP 35 and up award, something like that. If there was something similar to that or age-related awards, then yes. But is he the best player this season, this individual season? Are his numbers, his production, and what his team does with and without him make him the best player throughout, the most valuable player for that season? Not the most valuable 35-year-old or the most valuable 36-year-old or the most valuable 6'9" point guard. None of that stuff really should matter as much. And so I'm with you. I don't think that's something that makes a whole lot of sense. And it's kind of always almost just made me laugh, because it's very obviously a reach by a certain subset of fans just trying to make a case for one player. And
it's not even just fans. There's media personalities that are out there that advocate for a player specifically on age. So I also want to touch on a couple. We don't have to spend a whole lot of time on these, but what do you think of the life on the line theory? Like, who do you want the ball in your hands with your life on the line? Like, me, when I hear that, it's like, why is my life in danger based on the outcome of this game? I don't understand why that's relevant.
Right. Like, it's fun to think about, but I don't know that makes any sense. And I'm with you. Is it a Space Jam? Did a bunch of aliens come down and they're taking over Earth if we lose this game? Then I might pick a little differently. But we're talking about
it doesn't recognize, like what you said, that single season body of work.
Right. And exactly. Yeah. I'm nothing else to add, really. That just, it's a fun thing to think about, but it's not something that's based in reality. So
yeah, we could think about it, but when we actually go and vote, like, that should have no impact on the final outcome of our decision. And we both spoke on single season body of work. There's people who get criticized based on last season, how they came in, right? There's postseason success somehow gets wrapped up into this regular season award, and players get past performance discredited against them. And then there's also voter fatigue. So I'm going to kind of wrap all three of those into one segment. I don't believe that voter fatigue should be a thing. And that's something that like even the diehards like you and I, Austin, will look and say, yeah, this guy's not going to get MVP because of voter fatigue, so I'm not even going to consider him. And it's unfortunate that that's an actual factor that we have to consider. But I don't like the career body of work. I don't want it to be a lifetime achievement award. I don't want it to be, something that it's not intended to be, a postseason award. And I don't want voter fatigue to be influential in the decision either.
Yeah, it is kind of sad to me that voter fatigue is such a real thing, because a guy like Giannis Antetokounmpo would have to average like 35 and 15, and they'd have to win like a ridiculous number of games this year for people to really consider him. And he is still one of the 2 or 3 best. He is still going to put up ridiculous numbers. He still does belong in consideration. But when you bring up the past performances thing, I think of a guy like Paul George. Like, what would Paul George have to do this year to even be in the MVP consideration? It would be astronomical, 40,
I think. 40 points a game.
Right, because so many people would just say, oh, well, he's got to do it in the playoffs or it doesn't matter. And that doesn't – that what you just said, that he has to do it in the playoffs, literally doesn't matter for this award. But it's going to make a difference in people's minds. So, there's a lot of different – narratives. There's all kinds of noise. There's stuff you have to be able to filter through and just think objectively, what did this guy do this year that who did better than him? And that's hard for a lot of people. And it's hard for me sometimes. I'll be honest, like I'd like to see a new MVP, winner this year other than Giannis. But if he deserves it, he deserves it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then the last one that I want to touch on, and we can just spend a brief second on this, is another one that I have is when we have 2 guys that are almost like lockstep for this. There's the whole switch team theory. What would this player look like on the other team, and how there's so much nuance. There's so much, structure, schematics, schemes, all of those things play into effect. And not everybody is just plug and play on the other team. And again, like, we're discrediting what is actually happening on the floor. We're taking a literal, like, no kidding, factual evidence that's actually playing on this season. And we're saying, okay, hypothetically though, let's pretend that this other scenario happens, and let's use that hypothetical scenario to impact what's actually, like, our judgment on what's actually happening on the floor. What do you think about the switch team theory?
Honestly, sometimes it sounds interesting, but the way you the way you worded it and described it, it doesn't really fit either in my line of thought. So like you said, I don't want to take something that really happened and compare it versus something that's never going to happen, or that couldn't happen, or that didn't happen. And I think sometimes too, that's where people kind of like, especially people who can vote on the MVP award and experts and analysts, you kind of like discredit yourself a little bit, because at some point, some of it is just personal preference a little bit. When 2 guys are just having incredibly good seasons, sometimes you just have to say, yeah, well, I just think I like this guy a little bit more. I think the way he plays fits what I want a little bit more. And there's something to be said about that too. You can't try to like weed out every little difference of every little player to get down. There's no one thing that's going to say one way or another 100% for sure which guy should be the MVP. At some point, these guys are so good that it's just, last year wasn't really, to me, there wasn't really much of an argument that LeBron had against Giannis. I think Giannis was kind of ran away with it. But there have been years in the past where it's kind of, pick your poison. Whichever guy you like is fair game. And sometimes that's the beauty of this. Sometimes it's just a personal preference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's our job, Austin. That's the kind of charge that I have personally, is to try to sift through some of these narratives. And like you said, and you say, yeah, it's fun to think about, but you've probably never heard it broken down in such a way that, like, okay, when I actually sit down and think about it like this, it doesn't make sense to use a different theory, right, for something like this. And I take it personally, like, even though I don't have a vote per se, I do take it very seriously. Obviously, that's why we're here on this podcast. But yeah, obviously, I agree with all of the takes that you just given, and I'm glad that I explained them in a way that you agree with me now. So we all agree that age, the life on the line theory, the career body of work, postseason success, and voter fatigue shouldn't be a thing, and the switch team theory should no longer impact how we look at this, right? So we'll move on now to the brand new segment that we're going to be introducing here on the show. Austin, this is your brainchild. Just kind of explain what we're going to be doing here. But real quick, I just want to remind everybody that we're on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. You're listening to the Break in the Game show, which you can catch every Monday and Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Austin, please introduce your new brainchild.
Well, we decided to call this new segment Pass or Shoot. I'm sure if you've listened to any other sports radio shows or watched, any kind of sports talk shows in the past, you've seen something similar to this. Basically, we're going to come up with 2 or 3, sometimes 4, depending on time, of the biggest storylines in the NBA this week. And Steven and I are going to give you guys whether, we're going to pass on that and think it's not real or it's just noise, or we're going to shoot, which means, obviously we think this is something that's real that's going on. So it's just kind of another way to sift through, like we've been talking about, these narratives that sometimes pop up that people may think are really true, that we maybe don't, that we take issue with, or maybe some things that we want to kind of shed light on that aren't as, some people aren't taking as seriously as they should. So I'm pretty excited about this. It should be a lot of fun.
I'm excited about it too. And just real quick, we got to give President, Chris LeBron of the Off the Ball Network a lot of love. We did pose this to our Twitter chat. It would not be Breaking the Game if I didn't mention our Twitter chat.
Right.
I just want to give Chris LeBron, the president of Off the Ball Network. You can go to offtheballnetwork.com, by the way, and get all your sports needs there if you feel so inclined. But he came up with the pass or shoot. There were a couple other, like a sit or bench or draft or stash, and ultimately pass or shoot struck the fancy of both of us, and we are now stealing it. But we will give you credit here on live radio.
Yes, we will.
All right, Austin. So we got 3 conversations that we're going to have in rapid fire fashion. You have the option to pass on this and then explain why you don't like it. You can shoot on this and explain why you do. The first one is a kind of a 2-parter. We have the Oklahoma City Thunder and the New York Knicks are both making the playoffs. They're both playoff teams. Austin, pass or shoot?
Well, I want to shoot this one, but if it's both or none, then I've got to pass. I don't see Oklahoma City staying ahead of Golden State, staying ahead of Denver, staying ahead of all the teams that they're ahead of right now. It is very close. They're all bunched up right kind of there in the 6 through 10 range. But I think that will kind of, figure itself out with time. Although on the East, I do think the Knicks can make the playoffs. I think they've shown, a lot of tenacity this year. They're a scrappy team for sure. I like that Quickly a lot. He's been, I think, kind of a bright spot for them. We haven't really even seen a ton of Obi Toppin yet. And so once they're healthy, RJ Barrett looks better. I think Mitchell Robinson's improved a lot. Tom Thibodeau, I think, has got that team, kind of got his finger on the pulse of that team, at least right now. And, that's kind of seems how Thibodeau teams go. They're pretty good for the first couple seasons, and then his message kind of wears on guys. So we'll see where that goes. But I do think that with how much more shallow the talent pool is in the East, not that the East is necessarily worse than the West. I just think the top 5 or 6 teams are really good in the East, and then everybody else is kind of just about anybody, but maybe one team could jump in there. So I have to pass this just because I think Oklahoma City is not necessarily there yet, and I don't think they expected to be. But I do like the New York Knicks making the playoffs in the East. What about you?
So you're shooting for the Knicks. That's fine.
Yep.
Just real quick, I'm going to pass on this. I would pass on it if it was broken up to just the Knicks, because if you look at the way that other teams that are ranked beneath them are kind of starting to catch fire, the Miami Heat are on a 2-game win streak. They are behind them only by like a game, I think. The Toronto Raptors are starting to figure things out. They are now 5-9. They are 13th in the East, so they're climbing the ladder. And it just looks like the Knicks, depending on what happens with the Cavs. We mentioned how horrid their offense is, although their defense is really good. The Atlanta Hawks, it looks like they're having chemistry issues. It's a possibility if I shoot, it's going to be probably a last-second shot. It's not going to be, I'm not walking up the court and lobbing up a 3 with, 20 seconds left on the clock.
So let me ask you this then: if you don't like the Knicks, you think the Heat are who gonna pass them up, or do you think it's more than just them?
I mean, there's a possibility that several teams could. I think the Orlando Magic, they look decent. Cole Anthony just had a heck of a game the other night. He hit that game shot and kind of proven me right where I had him ranked on my big board. The Charlotte Hornets they're on a 3-game slump, but they're still 6-8. So if they can figure out a couple things here or there, they can climb up there. And I mentioned the Miami Heat, the Toronto Raptors. You can never count out Nick Nurse and all of his guys. There's just so many teams that I have more faith in, and it's not to say that I don't think the Knicks are where they're supposed to be. I think that they're progressing as appropriate. They're exceeding even my expectations, but I've liked all of the moves that the Knicks have made thus far. And again, I look at this team, and in 2 more seasons, I will definitely shoot on the Knicks. I love what they're doing, kind of moving forward.
For sure. And I'm just looking at it now that you know what the difference is between 1st and 12th in the East? It's 3.5 games.
It's insane.
So there's a lot of things that could change. So you make a good point. I think
not much different in the West either. That's why I think Oklahoma City, like we can last season proved that we can never count out Oklahoma City. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander looks really good this year.
I agree. Right now I think they're in 11th right now, but they're a half game back of 8th place. So and the Nuggets just passed them by half a game to get back to 500 at 7-7. But the Nuggets are one team that I don't see slowing down. If anything, I think they're going to get better. So I don't know. We may end up seeing both these teams just barely miss out, or they both may end up making it into that the play-in tournament at the end of the year, which I'm pretty excited about. So.
Yeah, and that's all fair and good for the Knicks and for the Thunder. I think overall we would say that we're overly impressed with where they're at this season, but projecting forward, it gets a little murky.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now we're going to move on to the next one. The Brooklyn Nets are now the favorites in the East. Austin, are you passing or shooting on Brooklyn?
I'm going to be like Kyrie, KD, and Harden, and I'm shooting that all day. I'm taking that shot every chance I get. I don't think that there's a team in the East talent-wise that can stand up to them. I think we're just going to see them at some point here. They're going to take off, and they're going to go on a 10 or 11 game streak where they hardly lose a game. I think it's almost inevitable with the amount of talent they have, and after what we saw against Cleveland last night, there are some concerns on defense, but like you so eloquently stated, in 6 quarters of basketball, that's about better than league average defensively. And sometimes Colin Sexton can just go off and you can't stop him. So I like, what I see from Brooklyn. I don't think there's hardly a more talented team in the league. And if I had to pick between them and Milwaukee, or them and Miami, or them and whoever really, I in a playoff series, I'm taking them 10 times out of 10. So 76ers might be the only team, or maybe Cleveland, or maybe Boston, when they're at full strength. But I think the Nets are definitely the favorite in the East.
Yeah, and I think Amin El Hassan, who speaks on NBA radio on Sirius XM, I like what he said on Brooklyn. He says sometimes we get too cute in how we analyze the game of basketball. We say, well, what about rebounding, or what about this one arbitrary stat that just so happens that it doesn't fall the way that favors the way that the Brooklyn Nets roster is constructed. But ultimately, talent at the end of the day will at least get you there. And I don't see another team in the East. I mean, the Bucks are also struggling. They are 9-5, which is a far cry of where they are normally, and they are adjusting to their quote unquote big 3 this season as well. The Philadelphia 76ers, they're 10-5, which is really good. They look great, but they can't seemingly stay healthy this season. So, and they have a large roster turnover as well. I think that the Nets, they're behind right now. The Pacers, the Celtics, the Bucks, and the Sixers, they have just as many roster construction concerns as these other teams. It's just that we've seen these guys make moves in the offseason already, but still we're only 15 games in, and a lot of these players have missed substantial amount of time. Boston has been without Kemba since the start of the year. Seth Curry had missed a large part of the season due to contact tracing. The Bucks have had, like I said, they've had games postponed. They've had Giannis not look good. Drew Holiday is still trying to find his place on this team. Deontay DiVincenzo looks like he's trying to refigure out his role. The Pacers, off to that awesome start they had, they're kind of falling back a little bit from grace. Miles Turner is missing time now due to COVID concerns. So all of these teams have roster concerns. It's just that it's not as prevalent because none of these guys are out there burning sage or missing time. And it's fun to pick on Kyrie Irving for a lot of people. And I think that the media and fans will get too cute on the stuff that they don't like about these players. And that'll blind them from just the overall amount of talent that is on this roster, which I think will ultimately push them at least to the finals, Austin.
Right. You know, how many times do you hear, well, what if the big three of Oklahoma City had never gotten broken up? How good would they be? Well, we got two of the three, right here together in Brooklyn with a third who's every bit as good, if not better, than the point guard that they
You're
had in
gonna hurt
Oklahoma
some
City.
feelings. You're gonna hurt some feelings with that take.
Well, it's true though. I mean, the numbers don't lie. And like you said, Milwaukee's in second place in the East, and they've won 4 out of their last 5 just to get to 9-5. So they didn't start off well either. So it's early still, like you said. It's a shorter season, but it still is only like a fifth of the way through. We've played 15 games. They've played 1 game together. Like I said, just look at the roster. Look at what they can put out there on the court. They're the most talented team, and it's not close. So
absolutely. And now, Austin, in response to the Brooklyn Nets adding the only big 3 in the NBA right now, in my eyes, do the Lakers need to add another piece in order to repeat as NBA champions? Are you passing or shooting on that?
I'm actually going to pass on that. If they could swing a deal to get Bradley Beal and create a big 3, I'm all for it. Great. That'd be awesome. It's kind of a rumor I've been hearing going on, but do they need to repeat as champions? I don't think so. I don't know that anybody has proven more that they can do it in the big moments than LeBron James. Obviously Kevin Durant has proven that too, but it would be fun to see, LeBron versus KD and James Harden again, and LeBron versus Kyrie. There's a lot of storylines there. LeBron's first title came against, Oklahoma City, I believe. And, obviously his last title or his only title in Cleveland came with Kyrie hitting that big shot in Game 7. So, there's a lot of storylines there, and then the whole drama with Kyrie and him. So it would be fun to see. Do they have to make a move to repeat? No, I don't think so. I think they got significantly better from last season. And, last season they won it pretty handily. Obviously there's a couple more, big time competitors now, and Brooklyn is probably a little bit more of a threat than anybody was last year. But I think as the roster is constructed currently, can they win a title and repeat? Yes. So I'm passing that. I don't think they have to make a move.
So what if I just reword it, and I'll just give you a quick second to answer? Not necessarily a superstar, but do they need to fiddle around with this roster at all in your eyes?
I don't know. Not really. If it's not broke, don't fix it. I mean, they're 11-4, and they haven't really struggled much. They lost the first game of the year, and I think they lost a couple upset losses that nobody really expected them to lose, and everybody said, "Oh man, what's wrong with the Lakers?" But they're 11-4. They still have the best record in the NBA, and LeBron and Anthony Davis. Yeah, LeBron and Anthony Davis are still the best duo in the world, in my opinion. So I'm passing that altogether. I think I like the way they are right now.
I think I'm going to shoot on this one, and again, I'm holding it to the last second. I think that they need to fiddle with this roster, but I don't think that they necessarily, like you said, need to add a Bradley Beal. Maybe if they can add just another defender, if they could somehow end up with like a Robert Covington, if they could add one more perimeter defender somehow in the first off, I just want to say nobody better buy out a player or cut a player from their team this season. They just don't do it, because the Nets or the Lakers are going to swoop them up. The Nets right now have 3 open roster spots, so just don't do that. But I'm going to end this quick because we're getting to the point of the show where we got to close here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. You're listening to the Break in the Game, and we just appreciate all the support that you guys are giving us right now. But ultimately, I think that they do need to add a perimeter defender specifically. If they can add just one more consistent perimeter defender to line up to where LeBron doesn't have to guard one of these 3 superstars, and he can just give all of his effort to being kind of like a free safety on defense and then running the offense in crunch time situations, that would put them just absolutely over the top. Because right now, I think if these teams faced up, Brooklyn could give them fits if they wanted to absolutely put it to bed, add a perimeter defender, Austin.
Yeah, you're not wrong, and it could go either way on this. I just, I feel that the way they are now, they're obviously the two favorites for sure. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes, and I wouldn't be upset if they made a move and added another defender. I do like that. I just think that it's not necessarily a have to move. So
fair enough.
We'll see who's right.
All right, Austin. Well, now we're at the point of the show where we're going to wrap up. And Austin, I just want to give you the opportunity first off, just to say thank you for all the hard work and stuff that you're putting into the show, man. You're a blast to have as a co-host. I love having you. And it was fun. Like we mentioned earlier, we don't have a guest on, it's just us. And I feel like we still do just as good as a job. Granted, we have had some incredible guests on lately.
Right.
It's just nice to get back to being just us, man. And I appreciate you.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate that. And just to kind of speak on that, what you said, you know, when we have those guests, they make this easy for us. They make us look good. So it's fun to have to put in a little bit of work ourselves and you know, give our own takes and not rely on all of our great friends to kind of carry us. But they do an awesome job, and you do a great job of getting the majority of our guests. And we've had a lot of fun lately. So, you know, thank you for having me as always. And thank you everybody for listening.
Absolutely. Well, if you want to follow Austin Carr, you can do so on Twitter at AustinCarr10. That's where he is available. If you want to follow myself on Twitter, that's at Steven with the PH, BTG. That BTG stands for Breaking the Game, which is the name of the show that you're listening to here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio, which airs every Monday and Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. You can follow the show itself on social media at BTG NBA Pod. That is on Twitter and Instagram. You could also download our Breaking the Game podcast anywhere podcasts are available. I also encourage you to go check out our written work, which you can find at offtheballnetwork.com, where you can get all of your sports needs. So, Austin, we're wrapping up now. Let's say something nice to the people.
Hey, you know, anybody that takes the time out of their day to listen to us or comments in, likes, shares, all that stuff, it's wonderful. We appreciate you guys. You know, you're part of the reason that we are on this platform that we're on, which is still mind blowing to me that we have the kind of voice that we do in this business. So, you know, thank you to everybody. And thank you, Steven, for letting me be a part of this.
Absolutely. And thank you for being a part of this and letting me be a part of this as well. But that does it for the Breaking the Game show here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. We just want to thank you all so much for all of the viewership, all the listenership, all the support that you've given us. It makes it all worthwhile. That's why we do what we do. But we will catch up with you guys next time. For my co-host Austin Carr, for the Breaking the Game show, for Nothing But Net, for Dash Radio, for Off the Ball Network, for the game of basketball in of itself. We have been the Breaking the Game show. We will catch up with you guys next time. Much love, everybody.